Welcome to Turning the Tide. This is Candace, Salima coming at you from the heart of the Rocky Mountains. And today we have a special guest. His name is Jason Buck, and he is running for the 2nd Congressional District here in the state of Utah. And that is quite a hotly contested district because Congressman Jim Matheson has held that seat for quite a while, and just about everybody in Utah wants Matheson gone. So, Jason, I am so delighted that you decided to run against him, and I, of course, have formally endorsed you just so we get that out there so everyone understands that, I'm on your side on this. Real quickly, Jason was born in Moses Lake, Washington, to a family of 8 children with a rich farming tradition, which is one of the reasons I like to right off the bat. When he was 3 years old, his father moved the family to Michigan to farm potatoes, and at 9 years old, moved again to Adrian, Oregon. His family then moved again his senior year of high school to St. Anthony, Idaho, where he met his wife-to-be, Roxi. Now, we're going to stop there, Jason, and I am going to let you tell us a little bit about you. The listeners of Turning the Tide are quite politically savvy. They are awesome. They're across the nation, but we have a strong following here in the state of Utah as well. So why don't you share with us a little bit about yourself?
On the personal level, I'm just your all-American small-town farm boy, and I grew up in a wonderful family, father and mother and 8 children, but we struggled financially and had a lot of hardships. And, even though my father just was the greatest example in the world to me, my greatest hero, work ethic, and taught me so much about my family. And he was really big into family history in our family and how they fled, France to England as Huguenots when they were being, murdered in France in the 1600s and for religious freedom, and came to England and worshipped the church by crawling down through tunnels underneath the street. And, I grew up with all these stories about how strong my family was in immigrating to the United States. And I had this great love of history as a young boy, sitting by the fire with my parents, listening to my mom's, stories of her family that were early pilgrims and U.S. settlers. And so I had this great love of country and patriotism. My father served in the Navy. Both my brothers served in the Army. And I was a student of history all my life. But in my youth and the hardship of losing our farm, and at one time our family slept under the hay truck, and we even had to get clothes out of the garbage dump and receive help from, friends in church, and just really struggle financially. I always knew that I was going to change my life. And at that time, my path was football, and I pursued the NFL and eventually made that by walking on to college and in Idaho from a small high school, and got my start there to junior college and made an All-American, and then signing at BYU, where I became an Outland Trophy winner, which is given to the best down lineman in the United States in college football.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of the Heisman.
Yeah. So really a dream come true for a kid that came from a high school with 25 students in a graduating class. But I never, as a boy, I never set limits on myself. And when I read stories about my heroes, whether it was my father telling me about family heroes or picking up illustrated Bible stories and reading the stories of Samson, I just knew I could be that kind of a man and that kind of a person. That's what I looked up to and tried to model myself after. And when I studied the U.S. history, I would look at George Washington, and it was really my favorite. But, all of the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, they were just bigger in life to me, and I had a great love for my country. And as I went through my professional life after pro football, watching the erosion of our Constitution, I just couldn't stand it anymore.
I understand.
I married my high school sweetheart. It's just the best friend of my life that stood by me through all those years and believed in me going to play pro football when nobody else did. And we've been married almost 30 years now and have several grandchildren. And she's quite this more shy Idaho girl and small town and didn't really want me to run. But I said to Roxi, my sweetheart, babe, I said, I'm not a man that came to this earth to hide under a rock. I'm going to lead, and I'm going to fight for what's right. I don't care what I have to go through. There was never a good time for our founding fathers when they made their decision to do what they did for us. And there's sacrifice involved, and we'll be defamed, and and slandered and go through hardship. But if good people, honorable, virtuous people don't stand up and fight for what's right, what do we have left?
You know, that is exactly right, Jason, and that is one of the things that I admire so much about you and your family is that you guys made the choice to step out onto the public stage in this extremely volatile and vicious political field. And it is something that I believe in as well as you do, that I was not sent to this earth either to hide under a rock, that I was sent to fight. And you and I are fighting in two different arenas. And it is something that I have to be able to find men and women like you, Jason, to fight for and to support and to get there into office so that we can make a difference. So why don't you explain to the listeners, before we get into the details, you put on your website, and his website, folks, is jasonbuckforcongress.com. You put on your website that I am running for Congress as a Republican. I will give Utah, and I will represent, and let me see, just a second, so I can't read my own writing, Jason. I will serve Utah in Congress as an American conservative, fighting for our fundamental rights guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution. I apologize. I was writing really fast.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Why don't you explain that? Because you are going to be representing Utah. Explain why. And the reason I brought that quote up, Jason, is it epitomizes precisely what everyone going to represent their states in the U.S. Congress needs to understand. So explain that.
You know, I wanted to be very clear that I was running as an American conservative as a Republican, meaning I'm an American conservative first. I really find the Republican Party as a party is the closest platform to what I believe, even though, like everybody else, at times in our lifetimes, I've been very angry at the Republican Party and different members and what they've done out in Washington, D.C. So I was very specific about saying I'm an American conservative first, and I'm representing Utah in the fight for our states' rights and the Constitution, and the framework of the Constitution, the way our inspired founding fathers laid it out. I truly believe the answers to our ills are very simple, and they were given to us by very wise and inspired men, and we need to return to the principles of the Constitution and find the answers to our problems. If we're living within that framework of limited federal government that we as states gave to a federal government, lent to them those powers in the Constitutional Congress. If we stay with limited federal government and strong state government, then we don't have these issues like Solyndra, for example, that affect government involving themselves in corporate business decisions. You know, which is just insane to think our founding fathers would even ever have thought that would have happened.
Well, exactly, and what we are facing right now is a federal government that is completely overblown and overreaching at every level and every place in the United States in trying to wrest from the states those powers that were given to them by the U.S. Constitution. And when I say given, you actually put it right. We gave the federal government very few powers. Article 1, Section 8 enumerates those powers, and the rest lie within the states. And so it is very encouraging to me, Jason, to have a candidate such as yourself who truly understands that balance and understands that we have got to return the balance that we have here in the United States back to the states and put the federal government back where it belongs, doing the jobs that it is supposed to be doing, which it is not doing.
It's not
By
doing.
the way, yeah, one of the few things they're not doing is what they're supposed to be doing. So, yeah, it is awesome. Looking at what's going on in America today, Jason, let's just real briefly, Barney Frank has announced today he's not going to run for re-election, and, thank goodness for that. The man has wreaked more havoc in Congress than very few others. And we see the Occupy Wall Street nonsense going on. We see the Tea Party movement growing stronger and stronger all the time. We see state governments trying to decide what they want to control and what they want to let the federal government control. We see, 26 states right now are suing the federal government over Obamacare. The federal government is suing numerous states over their attempts at trying to control the illegal immigration running amok in their own states.
Yeah.
And we've got a nation that is on the brink of economic collapse.
Yes.
What are you going to do?
Oh, boy. Well, you gave me a whole day of conversation right there all at once, right? You know what? Let's just try to break that down into pieces.
Okay.
It was amazing to me as I got into this process to see how little in the Constitution is referred to or really known by many of the bureaucrats and legislators out in Washington, D.C. And by the President of the United States himself, actually, the current president. When you listen to some statements he makes, it makes you realize how little he really knows when he gets out and screams about, taking it to the streets and a true democracy, as he says, when he doesn't get what he wants from Congress. Well, obviously there's a man there in Barack Obama that doesn't understand that we're a constitutional representative republic.
Do you know what, Jason? I honestly believe that Barack Obama does understand that, but he doesn't like that.
Well, he doesn't like it because there's a balance.
Yeah. Right. He doesn't like answering to Congress. He doesn't like the way the Founding Fathers set it up with the House of Representatives as the most powerful, the Senate next, the SCOTUS, Supreme Court next, and then the President. And that's the way the power was set up within the framework of our Founding Fathers and what they put together. And he doesn't like that. He wants it all concentrated in the White House.
They want it concentrated, and they want to be able to pander to the masses of at least educated votes as they can possibly get along the major cities of the United States and the coast and the big union states. And they want to be able to pander those votes, and they want to be able to take our tax dollars from the heartland of America and use those tax dollars to prop up entitlements and unions and big causes of theirs in other states, where our Founding Fathers had never planned on our revenues being used like that. They planned on every state being its own testing pot, every state having the ability to Utah know what's best for Utah, Georgia know what's best for Georgia, Massachusetts know what's best for Massachusetts. If Massachusetts has the most liberal education system in the United States, then more power to them. And if Virginia has the most conservative education system in the United States, more power to them. And you'll find the members of those states or the citizens of those states moving to where they're comfortable in raising their family, for example. But when you have, and then the same with, if Massachusetts wants a Medicare benefit program, for every single citizen and guarantee them all their medical benefits like Obamacare in Massachusetts, well, it's their right to do that, but they should not be forcing Virginia and Utah and Nebraska and everybody else to do it with them. They have a right, and those unions should stand on their own 2 feet in Michigan and make it without being propped up by our tax dollars and be viable by themselves. And if Virginia or Michigan wants to be a big union state, more power to them, but they should be doing it completely on their own and on their own 2 feet.
Exactly.
And when you're doing those testing pots and you allow a state like California to go bankrupt, which you should because of their policies, if they don't conduct their business properly and they stand on their own, they have to learn from those horrible decisions, right? They have to adjust and elect new legislature, and they have to wake up and smell the roses. But if you allow states like California to take from the government coffers from other states that are profitable and responsible, like Utah and the heartland of America, and prop them up, then they never learn from their bad behavior. None of us do until the entire nation goes down together as a centralized government, which is what we're facing right now today.
Exactly. And that is the danger that we face, is that these states that are spending themselves into oblivion are not being forced to face the consequences. And in fact, that seems to be the motto of the Obama administration and those who follow them, is that actions, you do whatever you want and there will be no consequences, because the federal government will be there to pick you up.
And it's built an entire entitlement culture upon that. They have millions upon millions of Americans that believe the federal government is the answer to all their problems. They believe the federal government can, spur the economy into prosperity. The federal government can answer their welfare woes and their education woes and on, which the federal government, when it gets out beyond its role, is the most inefficient mechanism we could ever possibly have involved in our lives.
Oh, without question. Without question, Jason. It is something that history proves out cannot work.
It cannot, it will not. You can go back to legislation that caused the real estate bubble and the collapse. When government gets involved in a free market economy, they cause these huge bubbles and huge collapses. And when a free market economy works the way the Founding Fathers planned on, through the states and very free, then there's small, contractions, right, and expansions, but it's much more even. And the free market defines it. And yes, do you have to have certain federal, security, and you can't have the price fixing and market manipulation and national issues, but it needs to be specific to national issues, interstate commerce, national defense. But now we have a country that doesn't even do the responsibility, President of the United States, Congress, Senate, and secure the borders of the United States of America.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I posted on Facebook this morning an issue I have with one of the Republican candidates, in that when he was the Speaker of the House, well, obviously now we know who I'm talking about, when Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House and had control of Congress, had Republican control, Reagan granted amnesty with the agreement with Congress that they would secure the borders. And so he granted amnesty, and Congress did not live up to their end of the bargain. And so here we are this many years later, faced with huge issues that come from having such a porous border, not the least of which is national security. Yes. And so when we look at some of the things that the federal government is supposed to be doing, let me ask you this question, Jason. When we send you back to Congress, what are you going to do about what's going on the border? Because I know there's a law in place that says there is supposed to be a fence built. It's just that the Appropriations Committee has never funded that law. Well,
I have a wonderful gentleman on my committee, General Bruce Ranson. Just wonderful. I talked to him about the issue of the border security and the fence, because we live in a day and age of technology now where anybody with access to biological or chemical weapons could literally have a 50-pound backpack of biological weapons and come across the border and get it into a mall, a city, a stadium, and kill tens of thousands of Americans. It's very plausible. We live in a day and age where people want to do that to us. Why on earth do we not have secure borders and know exactly who is coming in and out of our nation? That is paramount number one. And the thing is, when we do that, that also starts to solve the illegal immigration issue, because you'll never stop the bathtub from overflowing until you turn off the spigot.
Exactly.
And you have to turn off the spigot, which means you have to secure the border. The border fence they're putting in right now, I've been told by the general that it's an absolute joke. They put it up.
It is. In places it is. Yuma County in Arizona is the only county that has shares the southern border that has a fence that actually works, and it was actually created by Sheriff Paul Bebu when he was still in the military, and he was over getting that fence up. Now Arizona wants to expand that fence all across their southern border, and they personally are raising the money from private citizens because the federal government, when they are putting up a fence, it is a joke. Chris Cannon, when he was a congressman down here in Utah County, he went down to the border and he toured it. He came back and he told me that they had fences that had foot and hand holds that they put in backwards, and that's how the illegals are able to get up and over.
Oh, and then they have the fence just touch the dirt, so that anybody, whether it's a raccoon or a coyote or anybody with a shovel, can just dig underneath it and crawl underneath it.
Yeah.
It is an absolute farce. It's a national security issue, and that means we need to work with our neighbors to the north in Canada and who they're allowing to immigrate into their nation and be watching that as well. We need to know who's coming in and out of our nation. It's national security first. We need to involve the military to seal that border while we're building the fence so that we can pull back the numbers of military that we have there. And as the fence is built, and then we require less and less numbers, but then what that does is the most merciful, kindest thing we could do for the Mexican people who need, rather than risk their lives coming across with coyotes and hardened criminals and all the horrible things that are going on in Mexico, which we have to protect the United States from, right?
Yes.
Which we estimate out 11 million estimated illegal aliens that are in the United States. 500.
Actually, Jason, the Pew Hispanic Research Center has refigured those numbers and released a new report that puts it at 30 million.
Oh my goodness!
The
number I had was 11 million, and about 500,000 estimated were hardened criminals.
Exactly.
So if you're going to 3 times that, then we have well over 1 million hardened criminals estimated. Yes. And then the Iranians that were, trying to bomb the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C. were in touch with Mexican cartels.
Well, and then Hezbollah and Hamas are both down in bed with the Mexican drug cartels, specifically, I believe, the Zetas. It's ridiculous that we have so much danger coming up over our southern border, and our federal government is doing nothing.
Tragedy is the blood will be on the hands of the federal government, and if we can't get this forced and corrected, you and I both know there's another 9/11 type tragedy that will happen.
Sadly.
The entire nation reacts to the point where we can seal that border. I want to get in there and seal it first. I want to get in there and fight for my nation, for our families in Utah, our wives and our children, and protect our country. And by sealing that border, it is the best thing we can do for the immigration issue, meaning the federal government's responsibility is this. And here's where they've totally got the ball. They've forced desperate states who are trying to solve the illegal immigration issue into acting on their own. So now you have Alabama doing this, and Utah doing that, and Arizona doing that. But that is the fault of the federal government for not acting themselves. It is their responsibility to provide worker visas, right? It's their responsibility to know who's coming in and out of our nation, for them to have the visa to properly work in America, the identification to properly work in America, because we have to compartmentalize this and say, in this box you have American citizens. In this box you have non-American citizens that are not entitled to Social Security numbers, to rights and benefits of American citizens. They are guest workers, right? And they should be. It should be very similar to a passport program where they come into this, they're identified just like a passport, and they have identification as part of that. And
they have a worker visa. I mean, there's H1 visas, H4 visas. There's all kinds of visas that are there.
Right, but a document that they can use to work, photo ID, allows them to drive in our country, allows them to be here and work, travel back to their country and take money back to grandma and grandpa and, support their families, right? If we have the demand in our nation for guest worker, programs and worker visas, then we should be able to pay that. I'm fine with them earning that money.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, and I'm sure I know the answer. But we have record unemployment here in America, and this is my opinion. Until every American has a job, no illegal immigrant should have one.
Yeah, they're here competing for American jobs, right?
Yes.
And so when I say a legal worker, if we had a sealed border and we had it controlled, and we knew who was coming in and out, we'd be able to allow the proper numbers in that the states would request for agriculture or landscaping or other work that they needed it, right?
Yes.
Then we'd know who's coming in and out. Right now, we've got this huge problem with everybody in here. And what do you do? Well, number one, we're not going to stop until we seal the border. I think that's the very first step we got to take. We just got to get that done. It's a national security issue. We've got to get it done.
It's an economic issue as well.
Yes. But I asked some people, I think if they had the ability to travel back and forth across the border and I'd be identified, would people be bringing their families over to work? Probably not. Some might, but many wouldn't. They'd leave them home, right? And then they'd be able to travel back home, knowing they could go back home and take money to grandma and grandpa, and it would help alleviate the current situation. You have people trying to get across the border illegally. They don't want to be away from their families. They can't go back and forth, so they bring their families with them. And it's a lives endangered. Criminals are coming back and forth. It's insanity.
It really is, and part of the problem is I'm looking at what's going on in the Middle East and all the unrest and everything. Right to our southern border, we have a nation at war with itself.
Yeah.
The drug cartels versus the military versus the government and the citizens, the poor citizens caught in between.
Well, it's tragic.
It is tens of thousands every year die on our side and their side of the border if we total the numbers. And it is ridiculous. And in my opinion, maybe, and you don't have to address this, okay? But you can if you want, but you don't have to. In my opinion, it is time to pull out of the Middle East and look to the problem right on our own border.
Yeah. Well, I'm not running for president, and so wouldn't have a lot to say on the foreign policy. But we better take care of things at home. When I listened to General Hayden talk last summer, and he's the former head of CIA and NSA, he said the 5 most threatening issues today to America are, number 1, Iran and their pursuit of a nuclear weapon. And he said 2 is China and the shifting of global influence now with the growth of China. And he said 3, believe this, is Mexico.
Yeah, he's right.
He said Mexico is the 3rd greatest threat to national security in America today. And then 4th was cyber warfare, and 5th was terrorism and Al-Qaeda. And that in that order. And I
have to agree with him completely, Jason, 100%, even in the order.
Yeah, and so when you sit there and go, my goodness, we have an open, porous border to a country that's falling apart. People are fleeing across because they're so desperate. They're risking the lives of their wives and children to get across. They're so desperate.
And terrorists are coming across.
That's proven. We have that fact. There's military intelligence that says, they know Al-Qaeda and terrorists have gotten back across that border. And we don't secure that border, and we don't have control of it, and we don't know whether it's a drug lord coming across or just somebody that wants to work, for a landscaper. I mean, we don't. You've got to have control. You have to have law. You have to have order. We have to seal that border before we can solve any of the other problems. And then we have to identify who's in our nation illegally. We have to know who they are, where they are, and they can then enter the system of applying for citizenship, but like anybody else, anywhere else in the world, but not
get in line.
Get in line, and nobody's given amnesty, but you get in line, and we know who's in our nation, and we know who you are, and we know whether you're a hardened criminal or not, right? And so,
yes, and that's part of the problem, Jason, is that we don't know who's coming over the southern border. I mean, for instance, they had this is a couple of years ago, and I know it's much worse now because now that the terrorists are working with the cartels in Mexico, and they weren't at the time. But they had 70 or 80 Middle Easterners come across that border and get caught, which, 1 out of 10 gets caught. And so, do the math. And they released them into America and said, come back so we can begin the deportation process. Oh, take a wild guess. Did they come back?
Yeah. No.
Come on.
How ridiculous it is, and how politically correct they are, and how they're worried about hurting everybody's feelings. You know what?
It hurts some feelings.
It hurts some feelings. We have to know. We're in a day and age where we have to know who is coming into our nation. It is not a right of anybody in the earth to become a citizen of the United States. It's a privilege for them to become a citizen of the United States.
And responsibilities come with that privilege, Jason. We have to take a quick break, and we'll come back on the other side with Jason Buck, who is running for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District in the state of Utah. Jason, we will be right back.